OWHO, this is your war correspondent, Jack Shelley, reporting to you again through an Army mobile transmitter and the British Broadcasting Corporation. I'm speaking once more from somewhere in Holland. This war is full of ironies, and not the least is the fact that along most of this flaming Western Front, men are killing each other in some of the most serenely beautiful country in the world. There are many things that become commonplace about war after you've seen it for a while, but even the most jaded and battle-hardened man, be he soldier or correspondent, is impressed day after day as he travels along the front areas by the beauty of this land, especially in southern Belgium, where the Allied attack against the Nazi offensive Bulge is underway. It's a land of sharply climbing hills and swiftly descending valleys, of pastures and dense forests of pine, of curving, steeply graded, narrow roads and small rushing streams, cold, dark water racing and splashing over rocky beds. Your Jeep hairpins its way to the top of a lofty ridge every few minutes, and you look out for miles, if the weather is good, and see a view that makes you catch your breath. The valley below, cut by the Ebony Stream, a close-ordered rank of neat little fields separated by hedgerows, rising to the upward sweep of the hills, wearing their green mantles of pine trees, so thickly massed together their branches seem to fuse together. Then you plunge down to the valley and bounce over the stone bridge across the river, and whisk through the little town, past the solidly built houses of brick and native stone, crowding right up to the street and strung out along it, so that almost every building in the place fronts on the highway. Past the gray church, almost always on the highest ground in town, so that its spire proudly holds the cross for all to see for miles around. And then out of the town, past the huge stone chateau that stands where the valley starts to rise again, like the medieval castle it used to be, with its towers and its enormous cold halls and its great fireplace and portraits of its noble owners on the walls. And, like as not, with American soldiers warming their shivering hands before the fireplace these days. And we run out along the road with its tall trees planted like sentinels, always marking at mathematical intervals the path ahead, and up the hills to the next view, somehow always different, even more beautiful. On my latest trip to the front, where the First Army is attacking, the scene was like a venture into some winter fairyland. Snow mantles the hills and valleys now, snow half a foot thick, hanging heavy on the branches of the pine trees. And on the other trees, a thick white coating of frost formed in the last few days, so that everywhere you look, the scene is white, broken only by the dark green, almost black, of the bases of the pines climbing up the hills. Think of the most beautiful Christmas card scenes you ever saw. Think of the most tranquil, snowy white etchings of winter wonderlands any artist ever drew. They're all here on a road that leads to war, a road that swarms with tanks and trucks and fighting men. Even the air is white, for the fog that's hung over the battle area ever since the First Army attack began still settles in the valleys and creeps along the sides of hills, so that a few hundred yards away the scene begins to fade and then merges into a soft white cloud. But as so often happens in war, what is beautiful to the eye is a bitter, heartbreaking disappointment to the men who slog their way forward to the attack. This winter wonderland, to our First Army, is perhaps even more of a foe than the Germans who oppose our assault into the Bulge. Our tanks slip on the snow and ice and slide off the slippery roads and hillsides. Our troops have to fight their way through the dense barriers of the pines and up the steep slopes against a murderous fire. Our planes are kept on the ground by the silent fog. So it is that beauty becomes our obstacle in this First Army assault, as well as Germans. And we have to hack at beauty and knock it aside to get at the human foe. As you get to the front, you see the evidence. The pine trees shattered by shell fire, their mutilated trunks standing forlorn in the wake of our advance. Other trees smashed to the ground by advancing tanks, the tread marks making black lines as they gouge into the soil beneath the white. The snow gashed by foxholes and shell craters. The towns where the fighting has passed, smashed and burned out. Only empty stone walls remaining of the pleasant homes along the road. There is precious little beauty where fighting has been, but that is not a loss to mourn about. Time will pass, and new pine trees and new snow will hide the scars. Even the foxholes and the shell pits will lose their harsh outlines and blend with surrounding terrain. But nothing will replace the loss of the men who die here. It'll take more than snow and new pine trees to hide the scars of those who are wounded here. There is sadness compounded in this wounding and this dying amid such unbelievable tranquil beauty. There's almost insupportable shock at the sight of red against that white snow, because there's only one way that red stain got there.
That was the first dispatch by Jack Shelley for WHO. Stand by now for the second dispatch.
Hello, WHO. This is Jack Shelley again, calling from somewhere in Holland. I'm relaying this report to you by means of an Army mobile transmitter and the British Broadcasting Corporation. I think it's time I talked a little about generals in this war. American generals as I have seen them. Now, talking about generals is a rather difficult thing in wartime. When a new operation is underway, for example, you're not allowed to identify the generals for quite a time, even if you don't identify their divisions. It's taken for granted the enemy knows who all our generals are, and if you mention one of them in connection with a certain location, the Germans will know what command he has. They'll also have a pretty good idea of the way he operates from past experience, and so might be able to figure out something of what to expect in the way of tactics from our forces in that sector. Furthermore, even after their names and their outfits have been released for publication and broadcast as taking part in a certain operation, correspondents are not allowed to quote general officers directly. The only exceptions are certain cases when, for example, a formal press conference is held, or the general issues a prepared statement. The quotations obtained in that manner can be published and broadcast. But otherwise, a correspondent is not allowed to quote a general directly, even if you don't give his name. So, while every war reporter meets a good many generals, as I have, and has lunch with them and talks over the current situation at the front with them, we don't get to say a great deal about what we learned. But in this broadcast, I just want to talk about the characteristics of some of the generals I've met. And of course, I can't identify them for you. There was the general, for example, who invited two of us to dinner the night before his outfit was to launch an attack quite a while back. And all through the meal, there was plenty of conversation, but not a word about the operation scheduled to start the next morning. No, the general wanted to know about how things were back home, and was greatly interested when I told him that contrary to the impression our troops over here often get, a great many people back in the States are not making more money than they ever did before in their lives because of a war boom. And afterward, he invited us to his room, a bare room hung with a few maps, and I noticed that he slept on an army cot on a bedroll in one corner of his office whenever he had time to sleep. And we talked again, mostly about the young Americans of this generation who have gone to war. The general said that when this thing began, and he had his first batch of new draftees to handle, he was certain the current specimens of American young men, what with their jitterbugging and other strange habits, would be about the wildest, most unmanageable, worst soldiers he'd ever run into. But to his great surprise and pleasure, it was just the other way around. They'd been the easiest rookies he'd ever handled. There had been fewer problems of discipline than with the old-line regular Army enlisted men. And once they were trained, they became the best soldiers he'd ever commanded. He couldn't say enough for them, and for their courage and their fighting qualities. And he wanted the world to know that they were the people who will win this war. And you could tell that while he didn't talk about the attack scheduled for the next day, the responsibility of sending those young men into battle and of trying to avoid the loss of more than the barest minimum was always on his mind. Then there was the general who invited us to lunch the day after his outfit had given the Germans a real whipping. A whipping in which the Nazis not only lost a lot of men, but a great deal of equipment as well. The general, naturally, was in good spirits. He was proud of the job his men had done, but he wasn't at all convinced that he knew all the answers. He mentioned one point of the operation where he thought he'd taken a risk, where he'd more or less stuck his neck out, gambling the German was on the run. It had worked, but he told his chief of staff to watch him on that sort of thing and check him if he ever had any doubts about what the general was doing. Felt that sometimes he might otherwise make a serious mistake. The day after a big victory, And the general wasn't crowing, just thinking about ways to improve his technique. And he was giving orders to see the supplies used up in the latest battle be replenished right away. Had to be ready, because something else might call them into action. And he was right. A couple of days later, I met him on another part of the front, his outfit in action again. And the general who called a couple of us in to give us a report on a new operation, which had just begun. Took time to give us a very complete briefing, even though he was up to his eyes in work. And just as he was about through talking, he heard a conversation in a nearby room and went to investigate. It was a Belgian woman who owned the house in which our troops were quartered and where the general had his command post. It seemed some other outfit had been in there first, some days before, and the woman had moved out, taking only enough belongings to last a few nights. And now she wanted to come back and get as many other things as she might require for a longer stay and make an inventory of whatever she left behind. This while a military operation was just getting underway, directed from that house, and the general very busy. But he called his own interpreter and questioned the woman very politely and settled the matter to her great satisfaction by arranging for her to check over the place, all with great patience. And when it was done, the general remarked he felt sorry for these people, having to move out of their comfortable house to make room for our troops. And he didn't want them to be bothered any more than necessary. Hardly the attitude a German general would take when his troops moved into a town, was it? But that's the thing I like about every American general I've met over here. They're not Prussian military types, holding everyone beneath an iron heel. They're friendly human Americans, and a lot of good generals at the same time. This is Jack Shelley, speaking from somewhere in Holland. I return you to Des Moines.
Those two dispatches by Jack Shelley were transmitted through the facilities of the BBC, specially for station WHO, Des Moines, Iowa. This is the British Broadcasting Corporation.
This is London calling North America. Next in our program, we present two dispatches by Jack Shelley.
WHO, this is your war correspondent, Jack Shelley, speaking to you from somewhere in Holland. Once again, this report is being relayed to you through an Army mobile transmitter and the British Broadcasting Corporation. One of the most courageous fights in the series of bitter struggles to hold the great German counteroffensive in check, and one of the first to climax with a heavy defeat for an important part of the enemy forces, was fought out over the Christmas holiday weekend at a point along the northern flank of the Nazi penetration. You've heard how one of the best panzer divisions in the German army was caught in a Yankee trap and cut to pieces, with almost 140 of their vehicles captured by the Americans, including 39 tanks, most of them in good condition. I was in the town where the battle roared to its climax just the morning after the Germans were cleared out. Some of the shattered buildings of the town were still burning as I talked to officers and men who had taken part in the fight. It was Christmas Day when I entered the town, and the fighting men were having their turkey dinner. The colonel commanding this particular regiment had given strict instructions that every man in the outfit have a chance to eat a real honest-to-goodness Christmas dinner, and they did have. I sat down at the table with one battalion commander and sampled the turkey myself while he worked on a drumstick. "Yes, sir," he said. The colonel hailed from South Carolina. "Yes, sir. We had our Thanksgiving spoiled because we were in a fight. But by golly, we took care to get this battle over in time for Christmas dinner." It had been a hard and savage fight, with the margin between defeat and victory extremely close for a while. The regiment had moved up at night in a race to get in front of the onrushing tanks of a Nazi division, spearheading the great enemy offensive. "They sort of dumped us out," the colonel said, and told us, "The Jerries are coming down the road. Go get them." They did get them, but not until after a savage Nazi attack drove our forces back within 800 yards of a regimental command post. And in various phases of the action, more than 100 Yanks, including the commander of a tank battalion, were captured. These Americans were all when our forces turned the tide and captured the town where they were being kept under German guard. Officers of the regiment give a great deal of credit to a hastily summoned tank battalion, which arrived on the scene in time to knock out much of the German armor. And this was the first battle these American tank men had taken part in since they landed in Europe, but they conducted themselves like veterans. It was almost like a movie plot, one officer told me. If our tanks had arrived an hour later, we'd never been able to stop the Germans and then go on to cut them up. Moreover, the whole Nazi counteroffensive might have been greatly advanced. For this was one of the most important spearheads, and it was trying to head northwest. But the real answer to why the Jerrys were stopped and then destroyed in this battle lay as it always does. The American soldier. And perhaps the outstanding demonstration of that was by Sergeant William Widener of Logansport, Indiana, and the small group of men under his command. Widener and about 10 other men were holding a barn when a swarm of Germans, shouting Heil Hitler and charging fanatically, began to attack their position. From 6 o'clock in the evening, all night, and until late the next afternoon, just about 24 hours, Sergeant Widener and his small band hurled back one Nazi attack after another. All through the night, the Germans hurled hand grenades into the barn. But we grabbed them before they went off, the sergeant said, and threw them right back. The courage and devotion to duty of the sergeant's men were beyond any words to describe. One of the Yanks was wounded severely in the left hand early in the fighting. And since he was left-handed, he couldn't handle his rifle. But he crawled his way back to a command post, where an officer assumed the wounded man was ready to be evacuated for treatment. No, the boy shouted. Widener needs me out there. All I want is some more ammunition. And despite the condition of his hand, he carried some ammunition back himself and gathered 2 other men back with additional supplies. Then, using his right hand, he seized a pistol and kept on helping beat off the German attacks. He was wounded twice more, once in the face and once in the shoulder, before he finally consented to being removed to an aid station. Another American soldier was holding a machine gun post in a foxhole near the barn when the Germans made their first fanatical attack, yelling and screaming. Our men found him later, dead but still leaning forward. He had fired his machine gun, mowing down Germans, until some of them broke through right on top of him. Then he had grabbed a revolver and fired 4 or 5 shots from it before he was killed. When his comrades found him, the gun was still tightly clenched in his right hand. Sergeant Widener directed the fight for 24 hours, but finally his superiors ordered him to evacuate late in the afternoon of the following day. The next day, the Yanks assaulted the place in force and took it for good. Of his 10 men, Widener lost 4 casualties, 2 killed and 2 wounded. After the wounded men were so badly hurt they could no longer hold any kind of weapon, they managed to get a phone to their ears and relayed orders and reports between the battle-torn building and the command post farther back. Sergeant Widener has already been recommended for the Silver Star decoration for heroism in one earlier action. He almost certainly will get another medal for this one. But he's not impressed about what he and his men did. We just saw him coming, the sergeant says, and we decided we'd make a fight out of it. That's the kind of men, you folks back home, who will stop this German offensive for you. This is Jack Shelley, speaking from somewhere in Holland. I return you to Des Moines.
That was the first dispatch by Jack Shelley for station WHO Des Moines. The second dispatch follows in 10 seconds' time.
Hello, WHO. This is your war correspondent, Jack Shelley, speaking to you from somewhere in Holland. This broadcast is being relayed to you through an Army mobile transmitter and the British Broadcasting Corporation. This has been a strange holiday season up here in the forward areas of the Western European front. Over everything has hung the atmosphere of war, closer than it's been for weeks. Even in the cities considerably behind the lines, where the Christmas observance was carried out as nearly as possible like it would be in more normal times, there's been no escaping the constant reminder that the most savage and perhaps the most decisive battle of the war is waged at the most German offensive. Even on Christmas Eve, in a certain Dutch town behind the front, that all-pervading atmosphere touched everything that people did. I went to a Red Cross club that night to watch enlisted men of the American Army being entertained at a special party. The Dutch people of the town had arranged a home talent show for the men, and afterward there was dancing with Dutch girls as partners for our GIs. By the way, one of the sights you don't soon forget is that of a young woman of Holland solemnly following a Yankee soldier through the convolutions of a jitterbug dance routine. Whether you think it's one of our finer accomplishments or not, the fact is the jitterbug dance is being brought to Europe wherever our men go in the liberated countries. In another part of the building, an endless line of GIs moves slowly into the kitchen, getting cocoa and wrapping themselves from huge mounds of cookies and cakes. They came out into the parlor, and soon somebody had organized a song fest. And we sang the songs we've always sung on Christmas Eve at home. Silent Night, Adeste Fidelis, Our Little Town of Bethlehem, and all the rest. And I don't think there was an American there in that room in a Red Cross club in Holland who didn't feel the melancholy of Christmas far from home, and who didn't think of his loved ones across the sea. But then it was time to go, and the GIs picked up their rifles again and clapped on their steel helmets and said Merry Christmas to their Dutch hosts and the Red Cross girls and went out into the moonlit night. Then somebody asked if some of the correspondents wanted to go to a midnight service at a nearby church, and we found the congregation made up almost entirely of American servicemen and women. As I said, it was a moonlit night, a good night for German planes. And as the service progressed, we heard the sound of sirens outside, and then anti-aircraft guns firing, and finally the rumble of a bomb somewhere in the distance. The congregation didn't make a move. The priest didn't waver a note in his chant. The sound of the guns came to an end. The Dutch priest spoke briefly in English to his American congregation. In this holy, yet not silent night, he told them, I know there must be sorrow in your hearts at being away from home on Christmas Eve. But he told them nothing could ever take the Christmas spirit away from men of goodwill, that if all such men do their duty, they will have won a priceless possession for themselves and for all free men. And he told them, with a sincerity that impressed every one of his listeners, that he prayed that next Christmas they could all be back with their families and their loved ones again. The next day, Christmas Day, I went into a front-line town from which the Germans had been cleared out only the previous afternoon. Shattered buildings were still on fire. Captured German tanks stood in the streets. Beside the road, Americans were still picking up the bodies of dead Germans for burial. And on the side of a ruined building, there hung a crudely lettered sign scrawled in red paint. Merry Christmas to all the battalion, and a Happy New Year. In the yard stood a battered Christmas tree, hung with a few crudely made ornaments. That was Christmas at the front. And a few yards away, our guns were hammering, while overhead, American planes traced patterns of white vapor trails as they roared over to bomb the German tanks and troops in the Nazi spearhead. Yes, the holy season is a strange one in this world of war, but there's never been a time when men were, or should be, more aware of the sacrifices that others are making, that they might be free. And in the Holocaust of battle, one learns more truly than ever before that, as the Dutch clergyman said, while the sound of guns died away, nothing can ever take the Christmas spirit away from men of goodwill. This is Jack Shelley, speaking from somewhere in Holland. I return you to Des Moines.
This is the British Broadcasting Corporation.